Hello everyone, and we're back for a brand new episode of How's the Shared Living podcast, episode 3 in season 6. And it's actually our 88th episode, which means we're getting older and older every week, which is, quite a milestone. We're going to be with you for the next few months to bring you the latest news, views and insights from the rented shared living sectors. So if you work in and around the PBSA, BTR, co-living, university accommodation, HMO and rented later living sectors, you are absolutely in the right place. I'm Deanie Lee from the Property Marketing Strategists.
I'm Dan Smith from Resi Consultancy and VerbaFlow AI.
And I'm Sarah Canning from the Property Marketing Strategists.
But first, we'll have a quick word from our headline sponsor.
Housed is sponsored by Spotlight Boost on mystudenthalls.com. Use Spotlight Boost to stand out in search results and drive more leads to your properties.
We're really delighted that Dan and the team from My Student Halls have decided to be our headline sponsors once again. They are such a key part of the student accommodation marketing cycle and are great partners for us at Housed. Also, a huge thank you to Wash Station, Utopia and Howden, and we will hear more from them later. Today, as you can see, we are in a studio, so you can listen, and I gave you a teaser there. You can also see us if you watch this episode back on our YouTube channel. But why are we all together in Leeds? Dan, Sarah, do you want to enlighten us what we've been up to?
We have been planning the Shared Living Summit with UK Reef. So Housed have taken a space in UK Reef because we saw last year that there was a real gap in terms of the sessions that were put on and some of the panels and the speakers within residential real estate primarily. So we want to make sure that the rental living sector is better represented at UK Reef. So we thought we'd put our money where our mouths are. So it's been really interesting. We've been very grateful to stay at Scape last night. So thanks very much for the team at Scape. But yeah, we've been meeting with the team from UK Reef. We've had a look at the space. We've planned it all out and we got to work planning the sessions. So it's been great fun.
Definitely. I think seeing the space and working on the agenda has made it very real in a very positive way. Got a lot of work to do in the next few months, but we're excited to have some amazing partners and collaborators on board, which has made it possible, including Collegiate UK, Aboda Students, Utopia, the E-Word, VerbaFlow, TLJ, This Is Fresh, Loft, Scape, Mirror Visuals, and far more soon to announce. So thank you all very much. And, we'll be working really closely with our partners over the next few months. And I'm sure you'll hear more about our 3-day agenda as well. So I think we'll be coming to Leeds a few more times before UK Reef in May. I might do some more podcasts in this lovely studio.
Yeah, that would be great. And yeah, we did do some agenda planning yesterday and it was really quite exciting. And I'm not going to share any now, so you're going to have to wait. But yeah, I think we've got some really great topics there and a really strong agenda. And yeah, we're really looking forward to being up here again in May. We still do have some packages available, so do get in touch if you want to get your brand in front of an engaged audience from across the shared living sectors. We are still hearing from people that are saying they're not sure it's for them from kind of PBSA or BTR, but the very reason we're doing it is because UK Reef recognised that there wasn't a central spot for the shared living sectors to come together. So this is precisely why we're doing it. So if you do want to come and get in front of that audience, then it's a perfect place to be.
And newsflash, it's also next to the bar. So it's in a great location. You can come and enjoy a drink and also watch a session at the time. So there's a lovely cafe and bar on site. Honestly, it's the best location on site.
Yeah, it's
doubt.
dry, so if it rains, we're covered. There's aircon, so if it's super hot again, we're covered. And as well as the bar, we did sample the brilliant food in our venue yesterday, and we can highly recommend it. So,
and apparently the best Wi-Fi across the venue.
Even better. So we've got it all covered.
We've lucked out. So it's department. That's the place we are. So if you're at UK Reef and you're looking for somewhere to go, department is the place to be.
Cool. That's great. So I'm sure you will hear us talk about this more often over the next few weeks and months. But yeah, do get in touch if you do want to get involved. We'd love to have you. But on with the show. So there was some news out from Unite this week where they are reporting weaker bookings for the next academic year, where around 64% of rooms booked from early January, which is down from prior years, which does suggest softening demand and those affordability pressures are having an impact. Plus, they've also pulled out and deferred of 2 significant developments in both London and Bristol. So what's your guys' thoughts on this news?
Actually, I think I took it as a positive that Unite have pulled out or deferred their developments in London and Bristol. That might sound surprising, but we've been talking, for the last 18 months on the podcast about if you can't do it right, if you can't do it properly, don't do it at all. And what Unite has basically said is it's not the right time for them. They can't get the build cost to where they need it to be to charge the rent that they want to charge and build the product that is needed. And I actually think, due respect, to them for kind of not compromising. It's obviously disappointing, I guess, for those local areas to have significant numbers of student beds that are not going to be coming forward. But I totally agree. If it's not the right thing, in the right place, at the right price, don't build it. We don't need more accommodation that's not right for the local market. So, yeah, I didn't see it as, I guess, a negative sort of strategic positioning for Unite. I think they've made a really positive move.
I think they needed to do something to arrest the slide in share price. I think that was the main thing. We use them as a bit of a bellwether for the market because they're the ones producing the reports we see on a quarterly basis where they're up to with regards to occupancy and revenue, and it looks like being another tough year if their forecast is anything to go by. I think they're saying they're expecting to get between 93 and 96% occupancy with a 2 to 3% rental uplift. And that's down from the sort of 97 or so % that they're on. I think that is a real sign of the times for the rest of the industry, that there isn't going to be this great saviour of international students or any new domestic students that can magically afford PBSA rooms all of a sudden. And I think that's where Unite have taken that call. They've been quite bold. They've made 60 redundancies. So we should just say there are some people out there currently looking for jobs. A few of them have reached out, and I know that is obviously a difficult place to be in. But I do appreciate that Unite did have to do something to just arrest that share price slide. Now, that being said, they've made 60 redundancies and they're doing £100 million share buyback. So kind of give with one hand, take away with the other. But there is an opportunity to streamline some of the larger operators for sure. So whilst, of course, we never like to see redundancies in the sector, I think that we're moving into obviously an era of AI and more streamlined tech, but also therefore more streamlined structures. And I think that has been acknowledged by Unite with the way that they've made these redundancies, but also then, stopping the development of those two assets in particular. That's a real sign to everyone in the industry that it's incredibly difficult to build a mid-range product that offers value. And fair play for Unite taking that bold call to say, we could launch this and you would then just end up in the value gap, whereby you're offering, a mid-range product, but you're having to charge premium prices for it. And I know that Unite would want to steer clear of that because, that's not their area.
It does show a really fast-moving market as well, because they spent, I think, £10 million actually doing the planning.
Oh, I know. I saw that. That's so painful.
Because they got refused. So through the planning appeal, and they still then made that decision even after going through all that, which just shows how fast-moving everything is changing and shifting. And like you both said, I think it's a positive sign. And it's probably a positive thing for the sector that actually, instead of focusing on that development, it actually makes it, you might think back about what do we need to do in our current kind of properties and how do we refine that, which I think is a good step forward.
And I think just to get it into context, whilst demand is down, we're talking about 3%. So in their trading report, it's 64% beds sold for 26-27 versus 67 in 25-26. So we're not talking about a massively distressed market. There's not massive alarm bells there, and obviously Unite have to count a lot of their nominations within that period as well. So I think it's more them projecting the future. And what we discussed in the podcast last week was how things have changed. And I guess this is a reflection of that. So, you mentioned the £10 million that they'd already spent on planning, but things have changed since the inception of that project, since the underwrite, all of those
3
things.
Years ago,
Exactly. And that's exactly what we're talking about. We said, if you can't build the thing that is relevant for the future, then you shouldn't build it, because what they'd planned to do 3 years ago is very different to what's needed now. So, it's probably too quick to presume that they listened to the podcast to make that decision.
I'm sure it's all us, Sarah.
But we did call it. Just saying.
No, I think your point there about kind of it is why, and it's impossible, but to have that kind of crystal ball to gaze into the future, where we were talking last week about kind of the growth of apprenticeships and changing degree programs, is that understanding all that, and you've got to call it. No one's ever going to know the future, because if you do, you'd be a very powerful person. But taking what we can do and trying to think about, and it just prove how difficult it is that actually these things get 5 to 10 years from paper to building, and it's really hard to predict that future, and it is difficult.
My worry is that this just goes to show that the only thing that's viable at the moment is a premium studio. And I think that is, 47% of the planning applications at the moment are premium studios.
You say viable.
If they can
well, yeah.
On a
if you can
spreadsheet.
fill it. No.
Yeah.
The only things that are really getting built. And that, you see some great buildings, coming to life, and Fusion's a great example. They're building really good buildings, and we've seen that in Brent Cross. And I think, though, if you keep filling that premium end of the scale, everybody has to adjust, because that's not always going to fill. You're not always going to be able to fill the premium end at those rents that you're trying to command, that you've underwritten, and therefore those rents will slide as the occupancy drops, and then everybody again slides down that affordability scale. And that's where I think Unite have probably just made a call early, well, obviously £10 million in, but to say, we will end up in the value gap if we keep building these here, and that is not going to be offering value to their shareholders. I think there's quite a few other operators that are going to get caught short by this affordability scale, and students sliding down it. So, yes, we're continuing to fill that premium end of the development funnel, because nothing else really works on paper. And for Unite to very clearly show that, I just wonder what the lessons are that we can take from this. I think, is there something that we can do with then going to government? I'm assuming that the British Property Federation and UK real estate as it is, they're now thinking, right, this is a great lesson for us to take to government to say, look, this isn't viable for various different reasons. And some of it is the 10 million quid that we've chucked into planning before even getting spades in the ground. Then it's the cost of getting those spades in the ground. It's the cost of capital. How can we alleviate that, incentivise it? Were there affordability issues with regards to London and the fact that you have to bake in a certain amount of affordability into these rents? That we'll come on to some more on rent caps fairly soon when we talk about Ireland. But I have looked at the show notes today.
See my face.
But I think there are lessons to be learned from this. I do think fair play. I think fair play to Unite for being bold enough to take that move, but they did need to do something relatively drastic to just arrest that slide, I think.
I guess it is a bold move, and will planners, councils, government be interested in these two sites that are no longer going to have a site built on them? They were a piece of land, and now someone else needs to go through that whole process again, which is pushing that development back, by years. And as we discussed, I think in our end of year one about planning and land, well, nobody wants to see a big plot of land disused and not being developed on. So it's probably a big statement.
Yeah. I mean, it is. I was just thinking when you were both talking, it's a weird world we're in, that we're in this housing crisis, that we know we need homes, but yet they're not viable to build, even though the demand is there. And I think that's partly product. I think the sector's got something to answer in that. And I think we said last week that innovation has to happen from the ground up. Like, we can't just go, well, I can build this high range product, this medium range, but I can't build this. It's kind of actually, we as humans, we can solve a lot of problems. Can we actually solve this? But it just goes to show the pressures on everyone, that actually in a world where we just need more homes, we can't actually build them. I'm sure we'll come back to some of those topics later
definitely
on. But first, we'll have a quick break to hear from one of our sponsors.
Utopia is the trusted partner for high-performance asset management, cutting energy costs, reducing risk, and delivering proven ESG results.
With billions of data points and 75,000 rooms monitored, Utopia turns real-time intelligence into measurable value, protecting investments and driving continuous improvement.
Choose intelligence that delivers. Choose Utopia.
A big thank you to Utopi for continuing to be a sponsor and partner for us. We do really appreciate your support. So content too, it's another topic I think that we actually discussed in our catch-up or kind of review or predictions of the year last week around BTR, and the Financial Times had a article about is this build to rent's moment to shine, whereas we were kind of saying the same, that actually build to rent has all the things make up for actually really building growth and coming to its own this year. Sarah, I'm going to come to you first because I know you kind of found the article. What was the article saying?
Well, isn't it great, first of all, that there is an article about build to rent in the Financial Times?
True.
So
yes, it is.
That's kind of my first comment, and it's a really, really great article. It kind of, I don't know, it covers a lot of topics. So if anyone hasn't read it, look it up online, because it's it's almost like, I guess, like a story of build to rent and all of the different topics that cover it. And it was printed on the 9th of January. One thing that we did cover about was kind of the amenity arms race in the podcast last week, and they actually talked about this as well. And it does seem like we might look to fewer amenities in return for lower rents. James Dunn, head of UK living at estate agent Cushman and Wakefield, was talking about this in the article. And I think it's really that what they're saying is it's time to shine. They've tried lots of things. We've got lots of high-end developments. There's been lots of amenities. And now they're looking at what's working, what's sticking, what are the residents wanting. There's a lot of interviews with residents in build-to-rent buildings as well, which is fantastic. It seems really that co-working within the building is the thing that residents are most looking for. Although some did mention kind of really niche sort of social events and ways of meeting people. And I guess that's the point really, and that's why we say it's for everybody, is everybody has their own reason to live in a building like that. And it's really, really hard for developers, for landlords, for operators to work out what that is, who the market is, when effectively the market is everybody. So yeah, that was really interesting. And then they talk about matching flatmates as well, which I know is something that we talk about so much in PBSA and university accommodation, and it's not popular. And it seems that with the student demographic, nobody wants to do it. But in Build to Rent, the Vita team have been developed a personality questionnaire focused on cleanliness, sociability and thoughtfulness to match people together, which I think is really great, I guess, to be calling it out that there's some thoughtfulness going on behind the scenes of.
I did love the little example about thoughtfulness was like if you went away and your flatmate left your plant to look after, what would the plant look like?
Yeah, but I guess
maybe I should ask you both that. What would happen?
But I think, you might not want to know the answer to that one.
I'm all right. If there's one thing I can look after, it's houseplants, but still.
No, I'm privileged enough to live with someone that loves houseplants, so it's not my responsibility. Yeah, but I think with that flatmate matching, that example of that question, I think that's a really good example of how to, I don't know, subliminally, like cleverly match people together. I think when we
not
talk
make it onerous. I think that was the point that I liked about it. It's like it's not heavy. It's like I can answer that question.
And when we've talked about it before, people are like. I think they take it literally that you're going to say to somebody, I don't know, do you want to live with someone, from your country? Do you want to speak, live with someone that speaks English? And we never want to go down that route. But talking about kind of their attitudes to life and their values, that's what we're talking about. So I really liked that example, as well. Dan, what did you take from the article?
I think it's really important to curate that community because to a certain extent, within BTR co-living and within PBSA as well, we do have a bit of a homogenous sector. And we've talked about the amenity arms race and how actually I think residents are more focused on value than some operators give them credit for. And, there might be a bit of a focus on let's build another cinema room or whatever it might be. And actually what they want is that co-working space, and they want a bit of social space that they can use as and when as well, and invite guests over. And I think that it's really important that we don't over amenitize these properties now, because obviously that adds to the cost. I think we can make sure that we have enough amenities that the properties are attractive and you have enough, of a USP to take to market. But I think it is going to be you know, the USPs are going to be focused on that community curation, and Vita obviously does a great job of that. We know that from having stayed there last year in Leeds with UK Reef, but also just across the board. You know, they will always be thinking outside the box on how to, you know, go that step beyond. There's many other brands out there that are doing the same as well, but I do think that making sure that community is harmonious, in particular, that you're going to live with people that you're going to enjoy living with. That's one key focus. But then giving people the opportunity to step out into that community with the events and bringing their social and work life together in one place where they live. Like that sounds really obvious, but we can't keep building buildings that, you know, and putting amenities into them that are, you know, purely going to try and be a USP when you come to selling it. Like, it has to be about the people there and about that sense of community that you can, and that's why the likes of Student Crowd and Home Views, for example, have shot up in popularity, because there's such a focus on the review culture and social proof, because people want to see that other people have enjoyed living in your property. They don't necessarily care that it's got that cinema room. You won't really tend to find that much in reviews. You might find a little bit about a gym or whatever, but I do think that we need to make sure that it's also about the services, not just the products that we have, but those services are key. And I think that's where BTR has a big opportunity to, you know, really, and same with co-living as well, to curate that community, to say, look, the focus of what we, you know, what each event is about this, and this is how you get involved, and this is how we can bring you out of your rooms. It's obviously important for PBSA, but equally for BTR and co-living. So.
I think one of my kind of worries when we talk about community, though, is that when people talk about community, they talk about one type of community, and then they start to develop that community for one type of community. And I think what was interesting about this article is that it's saying that more build to rent are increasingly aiming at older residents, and actually one of them estimated that 1 in 10 tenants are over 60. And I think what I worry about sometimes is that we get far too focused on, oh, it's for this young professional community and I've got to put all on these events and this kind of thing. And actually, really, as we've said before, is that in communities across history, there's always been a diverse mix of people in those communities. A community isn't one type of person. And I think you've got to make sure that actually, it's a bit like, you know, we do website projects or branding projects, and we look at personas, and your customers can be a wide range of different personas that all have different needs. And that's the same with the community. And just, it doesn't mean that one size fits all, but it means there is a point of connection. You've just got to find that point of connection. I think sometimes, in a way, we overcomplicate it by going too into that detail. As actually, it's just, you want to bring the community. Yeah. People want to live here and be happy, and they want to connect. And they don't have to be the best of friends. They might be the best friends. They might not be the best friends, but they want to be part of a connected community in some way.
One observation in this article is that, you know, we've seen dining spaces, you know, communal kitchen dining spaces being quite popular, and they're suggesting that actually, you know, ones that seat 6 people are much more popular than people that seat 20. You know, and that's kind of really obvious, really. You know, if you're having a dinner party, you want few people together. It's the same, I guess, as we've seen that kind of evolution in workspace and study space as well. You know, we've called it out before. We can't keep forcing people to be part of big communities. You know, what are you going to do with a 20-seater dining room? You know, that's just a waste of space. And I guess, and also, you know, no disrespect to podcast studios, but in a community where you might have 400 residents, how many of them are really going to use, you know, podcast studio? Because, you know, I'd say I've got quite a big friendship group, and in that friendship group, I'm the only one that hosts a podcast. So,
but also, I think it's a bit like Jim. Like, if you host a professional podcast or you're into podcasting, you're probably going to come to an amazing studio like this, not go to one that's hasn't got all the resources that we've got here to professionalise it.
What's the difference between a podcast room and a podcast studio? Quite a lot, as we've discovered. So I think it's thinking of those spaces and actually, how are the masses going to use them? You know, how are you know, if the majority of the people in the building have access to them and are going to use them, brilliant, it's the right thing to do. But if you're, you know, using space, like you said, that valuable space for very, very niche amount of people, you know, in a building of 400, you know, if there's 20 people that are going to use a podcast room, don't build it. It's not the right thing to do.
So do we think BTR is going to have its moment? I think that, you know, the pipeline doesn't look like it's massively increasing. Like, that's my slight concern. It is still very difficult to build BTR, especially high-rise BTR with the gateways and Building Safety Act, etc. I do think there is a big opportunity for BTR to showcase that value and that community. And it's really good to see it maturing. And the signs of maturity from what I can see are the fact that in years 2 and 3 post mobilisation of a BTR property, you have less students living there. So first year, bit of a free-for-all. Those caps typically will go out the window for some operators, not all. There's some that will maintain, a 10, 20% cap on students. But in that year 2, year 3, I do like the fact that we are starting to see BTR kind of dwindle in terms of that student representation within each cohort, because it does need to stand on its own 2 feet. Can't be PBSA by proxy or by the back door or whatever you want to call it. You have to make sure that it can stand on its own 2 feet. Leeds is a prime example. Obviously, we've had a wander around over the course of the last couple of days, and we know that it is full of BTR. It is full of BTR that is full of students. And I think that's where eventually we will start to see that come down, even in somewhere like Leeds, where it is that, there is a big pipeline here. There's a lot of BTR, there's a lot of PBSA. So across the country, I would like to obviously see more BTR development, because I do think it is a real solution to a lot of the housing crisis. But in the same way that we've talked about Unite, how do you make sure that it doesn't just fall into the value gap and all you build is premium with all the amenities and the podcast studios and the, all the bells and whistles, when actually, probably BTR does need to focus on that value and that community. And I think that's where the opportunity really lies for BTR across the board, because the investors are willing it on. Big capital, institutional capital. You don't tend to find as many short-term private equity flippers of that kind of portfolio or property, and I think that's really encouraging. I'd love to see more institutional capital in PBSA as well. But yeah, I do think this could be the time to shine for BTR.
BTR should have a maturing resident portfolio, because if it's doing its job properly, those residents will stay there as they get older, and they might move apartments, they might change apartments, they might, get into a relationship, they might have a child. So by default, if they're doing their job properly, they will age and they will get older and they will stick there and stay there. And I think, it still comes down to the fact we're in a housing crisis, and the people that are struggling most in a housing crisis are the people who are trying to move into their first home, whether that's renting or buying or whatever that is. So it has to be the value end of the market.
Yeah,
I think I'd like to see more suburban BTR. It can't just, not everybody wants to live in a city.
Yep.
As well. And, in a lot of parts of the UK, there are good transport links, so people don't have to live in a city. People are working from home as well, much more. So, I think, and if it's suburban, it's got to be more smaller scale. You're not going to have those big high-rise blocks. You won't need as many communal facilities because you won't have as many, residents. And, as we said last week, what we're talking about is just professionally managed apartment blocks. That is BTR, it doesn't have to be what's come before. So if the lack of buildings coming through planning and being built is because they're not viable and they can't be built, brilliant, don't build them. It would be fantastic if that kind of accelerates the maturity of the market by, really considering, like this article suggests, what people really want and need, and that has evolved.
I think you're right talking about almost the commuter hubs. And when you think about the BTR in London, for example, obviously Zone 1, you're not going to see a huge amount of BTR. You're going to see it in Wembley, or you're going to see it in Stratford, where people can commute in. Think about Leeds as well. Yes, there's a load of central BTR here because the land prices are relatively cheap. But why would you not be building BTR in and around Wakefield, around the train station, which is 15 minutes away? We were talking to Andy and the team at UK Reef yesterday, talking about the accommodation cost of UK Reef in central Leeds, albeit there should be a fair amount of occupancy in certain PBSA. But we know that people will stay in Wakefield and travel in. Well, that's where I think we need to be focusing our attention on some of these suburbs. Like you said, doesn't have to be the high rises. Obviously, that then avoids the Building Safety Act, etc. But we have to make sure that we are, or at least some of the key gateways for high rise within that. But we have to make sure that we are not just thinking, right, build a massive high rise in a city centre and then you amenitise the hell out of it. Then you end up with your premium product but that's not necessarily what the industry wants, what the residents all want. And we do have to prepare, to bring it back to what you said earlier, we do have to prepare for the fact that we want to blend some of these living sectors together, you know, and we want to make sure that you could have a student with a young professional, with a young family, with, you know, someone who's retired. Like I think there's a big opportunity there to create really nice, harmonious communities. Everybody is looking for their tribe. They all want to, you know, live with people who are typically quite similar to them. But then again, you know, then we just become siloed, and I think there's a big opportunity to really make the most of that community.
Yeah. Also, we're in a world of hybrid working that actually you don't need to be in the city centre 5 days a week. So actually you'd save a lot of money renting out of the city centre, and when you've only got to be in the office 2 or 3 days a week, it makes total sense.
And they're the areas
that
that people are struggling most to rent, you know, as well. There's, you know, the people that, you know, maybe want to move out of their family home, but there are no, you know, suitable places to rent for, you know, for that next stage of renting. And, you know, it makes absolutely no sense if I think about where I live in Bedford, well, people generally aren't going to go and live in London. You know, that's not the next natural step. Milton Keynes is, and there's actually a lot of BTR, you know, coming up there. So that's an example of really great kind of suburban / small city kind of living. It doesn't have to be in the main cities, the main transport hubs.
I mean, I can almost see it turning on its head that actually those kind of graduates or just out of school or apprenticeships just staying in those kind of out of town, and actually it's only when you get a bit more money or you meet someone or you're retired or your kids have left home and you think, actually, I want to go and get the city life now, the city fix now, that it becomes something that happens later in life when you've got the money to do it, because you don't have it when you start work. I mean, I moved to London straight out of graduation, and you know, most of my earnings were spent on rent even back then. You know, and my fun was I'd go and get like a £3 bottle of wine down the convenience store, because that's all I could afford to do
in the park
London.
and chug it. Yeah, of course.
But you know, it's a lot harder. It was hard then, and it's a lot harder now. So yeah, we may see that change. We'll have a quick break to hear from one of our sponsors.
Wash Station proudly sponsor this episode of Housed. We provide best-in-class laundry solutions that complement your buildings. Wash Station. Smart, green, clean.
Wash Station is a leader in managed laundry service. They use smart technology to deliver reliable, efficient laundry solutions that put customers first. And we really do appreciate Wash Station sponsoring our podcast. Thank you. Next, a similar kind of article we saw about a co-living scheme in Exeter, which is part co-living and part student. I guess it's interesting. A couple of levels is there a mix? Can students and co-living people mix together, or are they totally separate? But my question is back to what we've already discussed, really, is why not just create some mixed-use development for students and young professionals, and they live wherever they want? Why do we have to have the separation? I'm not sure we know the answer to whether they're separated or not. But
well, if it's mixed, if it's, you know, co-living a student is student. Like typically that's
under
what
a planning, yeah,
that's
it's
what
got a planning, yeah.
Yeah, so I think, but again, the planners have, in my experience, having been through the process, but also then writing these reports for developers, there is just this complete lack of understanding from the majority of planning departments about who is going to live in co-living or BTR compared to PBSA. So I think, again, we need root and branch review to ensure that we are building the right product for the right people. And then, you know, maybe we end up with this homogenous sector where it's totally blended. But I just think, for me, if you're building 800 units and, you know, 414 of those are co-living studios and the rest is sort of for student or so, there's going to be a lot of students that live in those co-living, you know, spaces anyway. Like, you know, you're not going to dissuade them from that.
Well, that's my kind of question. Really, it doesn't say out of the 399 student units, are they shared flats? You know, and actually co-living is the studio element, or are they going to be studios within the student one? Because then that creates kind of this, you know, pricing ladder. You know, are they the same studios? Are they the same size? Are they the same price? Because that just seems like a really pointless exercise, really.
Is it? Have they thought about the council tax implications and how they keep track of that? And it's just, again, just feels like a bit of a mess. Yeah. I think council tax needs looking at across the board as well within PBSA, because there are too many really aggressive councils there who are just chasing the moment someone checks out, etc. So all of that needs looking at. But, you know, who's checking that off the list? Who knows? Who is telling the councils and the government that that's what needs to be done. Again, it comes back to, let's hope that UK real estate is actually going to have some impact there, and the ARL, the Association for Rental Living, or whoever else. But yeah, I struggle with stuff like this when you've got co-living next to student, because that will just become student effectively by the back door.
Yeah. I mean, I think, it's great that, I guess we talk about some of these, we were just talking about some of these more suburban areas. Okay, Exeter is a big city, but, it's great to see co-living being built in a city like Exeter. I think I'm completely, supportive of that. I think it's just an interesting way of approaching the development of a site and 800 units by creating segregation. It doesn't really make it clear why that was needed. I think 800 student units would have been too many in Exeter.
Definitely.
So they've kind of halved it. But if they'd done 800 co-living units that are studios, that wouldn't have been right either.
Well, that's too much of a risk for an investor, I think.
Yeah.
To
But doesn't it come back to what we say a lot of the time, is that if co-living wasn't studios, if co-living was shared flats, then the whole thing could be co-living, and you would just have some that are, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 bedroom flats, and some that are studios, and then it would all be co-living, and none of it would be PBSA, which would give it a lot of longevity. It would future-proof it, and students could live there anyway.
Yeah. But then maybe the numbers wouldn't stack up. That's the only thing. Like, if you then remove that from being the typical studio product, that makes it less.
But you
viable.
could still have.
It doesn't mean people want to live there. I think.
No, I agree. Yeah,
it probably is all of the above, but I still argue it's not. It's, in my mind, it's still not co-living, and I think I've said this in previous podcasts. It feels like a co-living studio is a modern day bedsit.
Yeah,
effectively.
Yeah,
and we all know what we think of a bedsit. If I said to you a bedsit in the 90s, you'd have shock horror of, I don't want to go and live there. So it really worries me that we're going to go down the same route if we keep building these studios, because I don't think anyone wants to live in, not long term.
No.
Like, you might have a co-living unit that's got 10% studios for those that just want to, or coming in for work or whatever they're doing. But I think
it's hard to live in that environment in long term.
It's a stopgap, and I think that's the identity crisis that we've talked about, that co-living has. Who lives there long term? How do you make sure that the community is there and it's not transient? Because you will get people who just rock up because they commute, or that they just need to stay over in that city with work or whatever it might be. Do you get people who live in co-living for the long term? Well, define long term. A couple of years, that's probably feels like that would. I mean, I'd be maxed out within 2 years, I think, if I was living in a small room. But equally, who knows? I think it's worth us having more of a conversation with the co-living sector. It was really interesting speaking to Jamal Brown from ARC Co-living at Property Week at the Student Accommodation Conference and Awards. But he has done an incredible job of curating that community. We know ARC. We've either stayed there or had a good look round, and I do think that is almost more of a sort of hospitality concept as well. So it's co-living needs to find that balance between how much is short stay hospitality, 1 night, 2 night, how much is long term community, how many people are going to want to stay long term. So looking at that average length of stay. Be really interested to get some more data from the co-living industry on what that looks like, and how you could make it longer, make the assets stickier, and not make it transient, so that you have, thinking about cradle to grave here, PBSA, then you finish, you graduate, you go into co-living, then you outgrow co-living, or you want to have a family, then you go into BTR, then how could you take someone right the way through the rental journey? And is that what everybody wants? No, it's not. But I think providing them the option of that, I think is absolutely key.
I think there's studios and there's studios as well. So the studios we all stayed in Scape last night, they're big. They're really, well amenitized with, really good wardrobes, really good desk space, kitchen space, like sitting space. I think a couple could happily live there for actually a really long time.
Yeah.
But there are much smaller studios where a couple couldn't live. And we don't know if this development is single occupancy or not, because the danger is that you say 400 single occupancy studios, that will increase your transientness.
Yeah.
Because, people meet people, they have relationships. That's the nature of things. But if you can't live with a couple, another person for a long period of time, then you're going to move out of that, pretty quickly. And then what if you have a child? So I think those kind of single occupancy studio co-living schemes are are by nature going to be very transient and very short term. I think if you have a ladder of studios that you can upgrade to, if you insist that a co-living building has to be studios, then I think you could be really, really innovative and kind of create that longevity that, you know, you could quite happily live in a really fantastic, amazing studio, you know, with a baby or a young child, you know, if it's, you know, designed right. You know, I'm sure we've all watched loads of movies of people living in New York, and they're all like really cool loft living studios, you know, and I think that's kind of what we're missing really. And you know, maybe this development will buck the trend and we'll see some really amazing studios that encourage people to stay long term.
Yeah, I hope so.
Let's hope so. Let's see what the year entails. And we'll have a quick break for our sponsor, Howden.
Howden is the 5th largest employee-owned business in the UK and one of the largest insurance groups globally. With over 60 years' experience, Howden's specialist education division delivers tailored insurance, risk management and wellbeing solutions for the education sector.
They're the trusted partner of nearly 1,000 schools, colleges, universities and student accommodation providers across the UK.
Howden helps owners and operators protect what matters most, and so they are the perfect sponsors for Housed. Thank you for coming on board for season 6.
Thank you, Howdens, for joining us this season. It is great to have you on board. Our final content piece for today, which I think you've already alluded to, Dan, is about the Irish rental reforms. It's a big year for policy and legislation this year. We've obviously got the Renters' Rights Act coming in, and in Ireland we've got the rental reforms, which will see a stronger security of tenure for all new tenancies after the 1st of March, a national rent control system, capped at 2% in times of high inflation, an end to no-fault evictions, roll-in 6-year tenancies, market rent resets permitted at the end of each 6-year cycle, but only where a no-fault has occurred. Tenant in-situ sales will remain possible, ensuring landlords can still sell with a tenant in place. And there is going to be rent control for new developments, which commenced after July 2025. What have you heard?
I mean, anytime you mention rent controls, and I have a few people on LinkedIn posts recently saying, well, you guys just need rent controls, don't you? No, we don't. Nobody needs rent controls. It does not help with affordability. And that has been shown. So how do we make sure that the government in the UK doesn't take a leaf out of Ireland's book and start to put those rent controls in place? Because what it does is stop any kind of development. And I think that is a massive issue. Now, if you're going to say, listen, it's got to track inflation to a certain extent, but I mean, capping it at 2%, which is what it has been previously, but capping it at 2% in times of high inflation, investors just aren't going to think, well, yeah, this is something that's going to generate alpha here. This is just it's just such a backward step. I don't see that it's too interventionist. It is going to stop development. And if you want more affordable homes, don't put any barriers in the way of developers. That is the major issue that this is going to do. Now, to a certain extent, they're mirroring a little bit of what's going on with the Renters' Rights Act. They're probably borrowing a bit from each other. Ireland seems to be going that one step beyond with these rent controls for new developments, etc. And I just think that's going to be pretty catastrophic for the rental sector in Ireland in particular. And it will, in a country which has been famed for its development, think about the Celtic Tiger and how the economy was doing during a big boom of building in particular. That building just isn't really going to happen now. That's my opinion. I'm heading to Ireland with Verberflow in early February, and I'll be meeting a lot of operators of BTR and co-living, and I'll be really quizzing them on this as to what impact they think. So I'll report back mid-Feb as to what the impact is going to be.
I mean, it's basically the Renters' Rights Act plus rent controls.
Yeah.
And I think with the rent controls, I think it's a strange, I can understand why they're doing it in a way, but I think it's a strange time to do it because you are putting the brakes on a country that desperately needs homes. So I think I can kind of understand it more if you were, I don't know, looking to start, a big regeneration or an emerging market potentially, because you're setting your stall out of kind of what's expected. I think, the Republic of Ireland has gone through a really great, growth phase with development and like you said, that's got all the attention for the right reasons because of the amazing places to live there are now in Ireland for people. So to put the brakes on now does feel like a backward step because developers are going to think, well, all these people that came before me, they reaped the benefits, didn't they? They got all the profits. They did really well out of it. Why would I build now when I'm not going to, to experience that? So I just don't think it's the right time or the right place to put that, in place now, really.
It definitely isn't. But, the investors and some operators did get carried away with the rents across all living sectors in Dublin in particular, but also the other major cities. And so there is a certain element of the government saying, well, you couldn't rein yourselves in here, so we're going to have to do it for you. And I think, unfortunately, that real focus on, right, well, we can drive the revenue here, we can push the rents because there's a market demand there. I just think that is unfortunately, that the industries have now come unstuck. And it's just a real lesson to the fact that we need to get these asset classes, help them become more mature so that they can, get that long-term capital involved, which means that you don't have to worry too much about driving your rents double digits every year. So I think that's where the government have stepped in, unfortunately, but we'll see.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a year of policy changes, and everyone's got to get their ducks in a row relatively quickly for that. And as ever, we'll be keeping you updated with what we hear and what the impacts are. So just to finish, we've got some exciting news to share from one of our friends of the podcast. The E-Word has just launched their Top Voices of Property Marketing 2026, which I think you both might have been on last year. Maybe.
Absolutely.
Just give you both a nod there.
Thank you.
Top Voices is about celebrating the leading voices across the property sector. So those people who are genuinely redefining property marketing right now. The innovators, the thought leaders, the marketers driving real change across the sector. And they're looking for your help. So to uncover the brightest stars in property marketing. So whether it's PBSA, build to rent, later living, or any other corner of the sector, the search is on for the visionaries transforming how we think about and talk about property marketing. So who is leading the conversation in your view? It could be someone creating innovative content, sharing expert commentary, forecasting the next big trends, or introducing valuable data that's changing the game. Whoever springs to mind when you think of that, the E-Word wants to hear from you. Nominations are now open, so please head to theeword.co.uk to submit your nominations. Winners will be announced in March, so get them in and help spotlight the people shaping the future of property marketing. So that's us for today. Thank you to My Student Halls for being our headline sponsor for the season once again. Your support, as ever, is hugely appreciated. And of course, thank you to Utopia and Wash Station for coming on board again for season 6. We're grateful for your support. And finally, our newest sponsor, Howden. Thank you so much for joining us. Next week, we actually have a very special China episode with Tong and Viva City talking about how Chinese residents impact the rental sectors. You'll be getting a huge amount of insight from the sector specialists, so please make sure you join us next week.